Hello, welcome to another episode of the Data Science Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Dave Cole, and today's guest is Nimit Jain. He is the head of data science at Novartis. Prior to your time at Novartis, Nimit was the VP of Customer Experience Analytics at DBS Bank in Singapore. Nimit, welcome to the DSL Podcast.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave, for the nice introduction.
Great. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about crawling before you run. So the importance of sort of starting with a POV, a proof of value. Next, we're going to talk about responsible AI. What is that? What does it mean? And then, as I just mentioned, Nimit has some expertise in customer experience analytics that I think might be sort of a universal use case that any data science leader might want to embark upon. And I'd love to sort of hear Nimit's thoughts on what that is and how, what sort of tips and tricks and advice he has for the rest of us. But before we do that, I have one important question to ask you, Nimit. I mean, looking over your background, you're now in New Jersey and have been for a couple of years. However, your time at Novartis, you did spend 3 years in Switzerland. Switzerland, I believe, is one of the most beautiful countries on earth. Why on earth did you leave Switzerland?
Yeah, I think I concur with your opinion and frustration as well, right? I think there are some decisions which, you have to make collectively. So I think this was a collective decision in my family. And, when I say collective, whose decision what was?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we're data scientists, and the weighting of your vote on where to live is probably smaller than it is for other members of your family, if you're anything like me. So I hear you. But that's great. So you also spent time in Singapore, so you've done data science around the world, and maybe we'll talk about that in our episode. But let's start off and just talking a little bit about sort of your sort of best practice when it comes to doing data science and sort of the role that proof of values play. So what, in your mind, what is a POV?
See, I think, one of the favorite things for me is the challenge we have as an enterprise to scale the proof of values, and we call it last mile challenges, right? And if you would have asked me, what is a POV about, 5 years back, I would have just said, it's just building a model, predictive model to, tell business the power of AI. But now, obviously, the things are very different. It's more mature, business is more educated, and this field has really tremendously changed. So for us, I think for me, the proof of value is, how well you define the business problem, how well you engage business at the start, how well you design and iterate with business to make sure that we are solving the right problem with the right metrics, with the right mindset, and then also work with business to prepare for the change once these models will be embedded into their business processes. So it's a multidimensional, I would say, perspective versus a unidimensional from just being a data scientist to perspective to being more team perspective. That's how I define the proof of value now. And I think I put it very simply, right? If you see, 5 years back or 10 years back, when you had any phone, you never expected it will have a touch screen, right? You were happy with Nokia. But now, whenever you buy any phone, the basic thing you expect is the touch screen. Right. So the expectation has changed and evolved as the industry has matured. And the same thing now, the proof of value the expectation has really matured from a business standpoint, and also what you deliver at the end. So therefore, it's become more complex.
So the raised expectations can be a good thing, right? Because that means that the business is, your user is better understands your world and is more critical in a sort of a helpful way, right? So what do you specifically see as being some of those higher expectations? What does that actually look like? So you said 5 years ago it was just building a model and simply saying hey, look, I have 83% accuracy on this model. Look at how cool this is. Is it mainly around okay, that's great, but we need to actually show me how that can be embedded into some production process? Is that the biggest gap So instead of like a show and tell, it's more like, no, I want to understand like how we're actually going to productionalize this. Is that, or is there something more? I don't know. Is there something
I
more
think
than that?
right now the business is trying to derive value, right? So if they're really serious to industrialize and scale, they would want to understand, have a feeling of the value, the ROI of these
Ah,
investments. So which is
yes.
where the proof of value has gone beyond just statistical accuracy to more live testing of the models, where business touch and feel the results, see the live performance of the model, evaluate even in some production scenarios, and then take a decision and get confidence, right? Um, and then also prepare for the future. How would this scale up look like and embed in the business process? Because they want to really use it now. It is not like I think a good to have thing. Now it's right must to have. So therefore, the mindset is very much changed.
Right. So their expectation of you is they actually they don't want to just see you show a model, right? Like show the code and spin up some Jupyter notebook and say like, look at the results and look at the accuracy. They actually want to be able to see that model in production, or if it could be an app, right? Some app that they can interact with and play around with. And you even mentioned, potentially even put it into production in a smaller capacity. Like, are you talking about like, would you actually put it in some sort of an A/B in order to look at the value, like some sort of an A/B testing sort of framework where there's like a champion challenger, type approach?
I think yes. So to a certain, again, it depends on the use case. But for some use case, it could be as is versus the new way of doing things. So which is the
Right.
A/B testing scenario, where you see how the model performs with AI versus non-AI. But then the other could be where business take a parallel decision, right? Where use this in the more human in the loop kind of scenario, right? Where
Hmm. Hmm.
you embed AI and then make a decision for a less risky decision, if you will. And then based on that, once you really understand how to play and what it can do, what it cannot do, then you really take it to a more riskier transactions or riskier scenarios. Um, so yeah, I think again there are different flavors of live testing, and in some cases A/B testing fits. In some cases A/B testing doesn't fit.
Right.
Yeah,
But then you also talk about the role in these POVs of clearly the business user, your user, um, has a more active role in this. Like, what sort of gates do you put in place? So let's say the business user is playing around with some model that your team has created. You've worked with them to sort of monetize. You come up with some ROI calculation. Then what happens? Like, is it purely their decision as to whether or not it gets put into production? Is it a collaborative decision? Is it purely just based on ROI? What are some of the factors that
yeah.
make it go from POV to actually, okay, this is something that we are going to maintain into production?
See, again, I think obviously, a business might get impatient on, getting the ROI, but,
Oh,
we
never,
cannot
never.
get the returns now, right? These
Right.
things takes time to really help understand the top line and bottom line impact. So I think it's more of also, personal sense of comfort and, how business is really seeing this in their whole end-to-end vision. So I think definitely all of our work which has gone industrialized because of business, and whichever has not gone industrialized, it's a mix of business plus data science, right? Because it could be that in some cases your data was not predictive enough and it's not able to beat human accuracy, or at least be the same as what humans are doing. Or it could be because the cost of production is much higher versus the potential ROI in the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But I think eventually whatever happens, even if POV doesn't goes in production, I think there's always a benefit, because we knew a lot of those models can be reused in a different context, different problem settings. So a lot of the work doesn't go waste. We ensure as a data scientist, but yeah, wherever we have productionalized the model, it has really productionalized because business see the value, short term and long term both. Yeah,
Right.
and mostly these are soft in nature at the start, and based on some sort of rough cut calculations and this A/B testing in a smaller context. But then, yeah, I think long term, the usage of the model and the insights depend on, are they really reaping benefits out of it? Yeah.
Sure, sure. And I also imagine that we talked about the bar being raised in terms of the expectations on the business side. I imagine the quality of the POVs that you've created today in terms of their sort of how ready they are to be pushed into production, could be code standards has improved over time. Just the overall knowledge of like, hey, this model needs to have a sub-second latency or whatever. Like that has improved, right? So the speed with which if and when the decision is made that yes, this model needs to be put into production, I imagine that like your models today are more ready, or more production ready than maybe they were. Is that safe to say?
I think I think that's where probably the responsible AI piece also comes in, which we will talk probably. I think, but what happens for us, industrialization is not just the model part of it, but also you might be experimenting on a smaller scope. But the smaller scope is good where you have one brand, one country, one region, one manufacturing site, whatever dimension you take. But when you industrialize, I have not seen typically it's apple to apple, right? Whatever you did in POV, it's not just take that in production. Obviously, the scope gets enhanced, and your reason to believe is that whatever you've done in POV can be easily scaled to the same archetype, right? Whatever you've chosen. So that's for us is industrialization, which might take the same amount of time and effort which the POVs took, but eventually the idea is that the time doesn't increase linearly, right? It has decreasing returns in terms of the effort you have to put.
Right. So that effort should go down over time. That makes sense. Well, clearly, I mean, do you have any projects that just are like, okay, this is going into production, or do you always sort of take this POV, type approach?
I think there are certain problems where, for example, if we know we have done this problem before, right, and then it is a different function, different region, then I think might be more an extension. But I would say most of the time it's you have to contextualize to the problem you're solving. As much as you want to reuse, you reuse, but then contextualization itself is a big task. Yeah.
Right. That makes total sense. Well, you did mention responsible AI. I want to dive into that. That's our next topic. So first of all, what is responsible AI? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, again, I think if you look at the definition, right, I think a lot of Google and Microsoft and a lot of these tech giants have been actively working on responsible AI. And I think, what we have done is, we have a more broader point of view on responsible AI, because being in the healthcare and I think what I would, give you some example, for example, there are some principles which we have defined and which is broad enough. And one of the principles is environmental sustainability, right? So simple things like, for us, what this really means as a data scientist is, when you build models, do you have to always have a complex model or which takes, 60 GPUs to run for X number of days versus having a simpler model, which might be a little bit less accurate, but then it runs, more efficiently. I think we are now making those trade-offs in a more responsible way versus, more unidimensional way.
And by sustainable, do you mean? I mean, certainly there's a cost impact of having some model that requires 60 GPUs. Love to know what that model is, but at any rate, or are you thinking about like environmental sustainability? Like literally, like that's a lot of GPU power, and that's taking up a lot of energy and not good for the planet. Like, are you thinking about it from that perspective?
Yes, exactly. I think because when I gave you this example of 60 GPU, it might be just one model, but I think as you start putting a drop, more drops in the ocean, it becomes an ocean eventually, right? So it might be a big cost, and then obviously it has an impact to the environment. So as a data scientist, I think, we are now making sure we have a conversation with business at the get-go in the proof of values stage itself, where we do these trade-off decisions and show them, and then, really make a judicious choice what is good for the project. So I think what we are doing is with these responsible AI 8 principles, we are bringing on early in the game versus bringing tail end, right? So then I think there are very high chances that our POVs get industrialized in production and also used at the end of the day. But there are many principles. I think one of the interesting one, which is environmental sustainability for us. There is always biasness, model biasness, which is well understood out there. And I think we typically leverage more of these open source tools, if you will, right?
Like what?
Sorry?
Like what? Like what open source tools? So how does open source tools play a role in responsible AI?
So I think when we talk about biasness, right? I think biasness is to understand are there certain groups and cohorts within your whole data set where the model is overperforming or underperforming, simply put, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we are trying to make sure we use some tools like there's this error.ai from Microsoft. It's an open source tool which can really dissect your errors, a model error to a large granularity and tell you where the model is underperforming. Yeah.
Right.
And also, there is this biasness is also how you better explain the model to the business. So we are using a lot of these explainable AI models, which is more heuristic based, right? The Shapley based models, either from Microsoft or there are a lot of open source. So we are really bring that early on, even before business asks us, right? Because initially we used to just give them prediction, but now we know they're just not happy with the prediction. They also want to know why. And then they also want to know how they can change the future. So there are this whole journey which we have learned over multiple POVs, which we want to bring it early on. Yeah.
Right. So let me try to put it in my own words here, Nimit. But explainability and bias in what you're saying is that they're very much related. So if you just have sort of a black box model that is spitting out a prediction, like the business is no longer saying like, oh, sure, let's just roll this into production. Let's go. They want to understand that, no, what are the features that are part of this model. They want to open up the black box. They want to be able to explain why it has the predictive power that it has, because in part they want to understand like is there any explicit bias going on? Are there any features here that are being used that, I don't know, it could be gender, it could be race or ethnicity at play, where it could be there could be that explicit bias and they might not be comfortable, and they should not be comfortable putting a model into production that is based off of features like that. So is that am I tying that together? Does that sound right to you?
So you're right. I think because the topic which I brought about explainable AI also has to deal with transparency and explainability of the models. So there is another principle, and this biasness and transparency is sort of interlinked. Right. And yes, the transparency is very important now. We have to, even if we use the black box model, we have to make sure we show what is driving those predictions. And for some of these areas, you have the maturity curve is very high in the AI industry, and for some, it is still maturing, primarily in the space of NLP, for example, right? So we also custom design those algorithms to answer some of these business questions, right? Versus using on-the-shelf algorithms which are there.
So your team is actually creating their own algorithms so that they can to help with that transparency.
Yep.
I mean, oh, that's great.
Yeah. And also developing those products actually. So we are also co-developing those open source products with Microsoft, for example, because we are using those products actively. So and then again, the context would really make the products more mature, right?
Right. Oh, that collaboration is I mean, that's great. And it's not every, there are certain data science teams, right, that are, I hesitate to say sophisticated enough, right? Because like a lot of data science teams, the focus is on sort of applied data science, like taking the algorithm and applying it to a real world problem, and then having it spit out a prediction or classify. It could be a classifier as well, right? So, but separately, like some teams focus on also sort of a research element where they might be have read a paper and maybe there isn't an open source version of the algorithm out there, and they actually go ahead and build it. And those those teams, there's more work there. But to your point, one of the benefits and why you might want to do that is increased transparency. And I think that's. I mean, are there any other benefits in your mind other than increased transparency? I can imagine, but to actually having a team, build their own algorithms.
So I think a lot of the obviously it's also comes from the kind of people whom you hire in the team, right? So now obviously all of these data scientists have been trained to contribute,
Right.
because they are not only the consumers there, but they also want to be producers of intelligence out there. So I think it's very very important to make sure our data scientists remain excited, and feel more powered and involved in the overall data science as a theme. And that's the reason we focus extensively people to contribute, on the knowledge, as well as be the first consumers of some of those new algorithms, right? So first
Right.
adopters is also not an easy thing, right? Now in NLP, everybody talks about BERT, but then if you are a first consumer of it, really you have seen the progression of it, and you can talk much more intelligently, and also you can use it where it is necessary to be used versus using it as a Swiss knife everywhere.
Right.
So I think there is a lot of advantages for the data science teams to focus on innovation, as a producer as well as consumer, right? Both.
So quickly, for our audience who may not be familiar with BERT and how it's applied in NLP, what just explain it if you can, to our audience.
So
And me, maybe.
again, it's a I would say transformer-based network, right? Again, the more you ask me to open the Pandora box, the more complex it'll get. But
Sure.
I can definitely tell you it was a iPhone magic, right, in the world of NLP, in October 2018, if I'm not wrong. And that's when this is an open source algorithm released by Google, which has really high accuracy in a lot of the natural language tasks, right? Whether it's machine translation, whether it is sentiment analysis, whether it's just classification, whether the email is spam or not a spam. So now I think the baseline for all of the NLP work has changed to be BERT, versus a simple different way of doing things before it. So I can probably stop here, otherwise it get more complex. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just Googling BERT myself. I know, I'm somewhat familiar with it. The acronym is bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. It comes from the researchers at Google AI language, and it's basically looks like it's correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a framework for just an open source framework that allows your teams out there to better do NLP related use cases. That's a super high level summarization from yours truly, but there's a lot out there. It sounds like it's on the cutting edge. So I guess what you were saying though is that if you've been following the evolution of BERT, because it is fairly cutting edge, there are ways in which your team can actually take it upon themselves to come up with their own slight tweaks of the algorithm. Okay, to make it more customized for your team specific use case, and that's a great way to keep your team sort of actively engaged, and especially your high performers who are very sort of cutting edge minded, and keep them highly interested in what they're doing, right? And obviously it has a business value to it, right? Because it's obviously being tailored to a problem that you have at Novartis. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. Well, let's move on to the next topic. So, like, changing gears substantially here and talking about customer experience analytics. That's an area almost all software companies. I mean, most retailers that have any sort of a restaurants, you name it. It's a sort of a fairly universal challenge for companies out there, is to ensure that customers are having a great experience. So talk a little bit about, like, what is customer experience analytics, and I want to dive into a little bit of some of the use cases and some of those challenges.
Sure. Yeah, I think again, this customer experience analytics, I did about, I would say, half a decade back, and when a lot of buzzword was around user experience, personas, thinking in the shoes of customers, and I think those things were out there, and there were a lot of best practices where a lot of the companies which were more customer focused was trying to adopt. And we were trying to solve some very interesting use cases. For example, how we can have a seamless customer onboarding if you are of a bank, right? So this customer experience analytics I did for a bank in Singapore, and there, the worst of the biggest problem is, if you are a new customer, you have to open an account in a bank. There's so many hurdles, hoops and hurdles you have to go through.
Right.
And that's where we wanted to really think in the shoes of customer. So trying to solve these problems of how to really have a seamless onboarding for a customer, or even simple things like if you go to an ATM and you withdraw cash or whatever you want to do there in the ATM, how you can have a personalized view on the screens, right? Versus a generic four things on the screen. Yeah. Because all of the information in the bank, at least the banking world, customers give to us, right? We don't have to buy the information. So therefore you can really individualize the experience of the customer. And the other small interesting problem, we also solved was around, let's say if you're a customer and, going to ATM and your the debit card gets stuck in an ATM, right? What is the first thing you do?
I freak out. I worry that I assume it's gone, and I call the bank.
Exactly. So I think,
Yeah.
and that's what, and this is a big cost to the bank. So,
Right.
and even though we know that, we have eaten your card, but we cannot do anything until you call us and inform us. So this
Right.
is completely disjoint. So that's where, we did a lot of A/B testing and trying to change the customer behavior instead of calling the bank to we proactively telling them, hey, we know your card is stuck. Your card will be there in your home in 2 days, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
I think so. A lot of customer experience analytics we did primarily in the upstream of that whole customer journey, right? When you're trying to chart out who is your customer, what is their experiences, what are their pain points, who are the personas we are even talking about. That's where we can get more, data driven, because we have a lot of historical data and we used to really mine information to understand what is driving the customer sentiments across these different problem statements, which I talked to you about, right? To have more factual customer journey versus a hypothetical customer journey, and then figure out, as part of the customer experience, which kind of personas we have, whom to talk to for focused interview, and then what should be the interventions. And then again, do A/B testing, right? To see
Right.
if we are able to influence the customer journey from a bad experience to a happy experience. So yeah, it was all data driven as well as a lot of qualitative analysis.
So I took a bunch of notes here. So it sounds like, just to sort of summarize, a lot of the focus around customer experience analytics is in a few different areas, right? So personalization is a big one, right? The theory there is the more personalized the experience, the better experience you're going to have, right? The better overall satisfaction that a customer might have, and data science obviously can play a role there. Simplifying processes, so that could be anything from your onboarding process and what it takes to create an account to I don't know, like getting money out of an ATM and making that more easily and more streamlined. And then understanding who your customer, and like sort of this is fairly universal, but understanding the various cohorts and the various personas that you have out there, putting names to them, and trying to see, might, from a personalization standpoint, each of those personas, you might want to have different experiences based on what persona that customer might fall into. And then understanding the overall customer journey, right? Where they are in that journey. Are they new, a new customer, just sort of being onboarded, or they're a lifelong customer, that's that where maybe they haven't been using the full array of services, and you might want to upsell them on something or cross sell them on something. So those are just some areas
So
of so that customer experience analytics. Did I miss anything there, Nimit?
I think the only fifth dimension would be the launches, right? When you do a lot of launches of new products, how to learn from the past mistakes.
Right.
So that is another dimension you can use, this data-driven customer experience approach.
And there's also, I mean, and forgot to mention the underpinning to a lot of this is doing A/B testing, right? So I don't know. Do you have any advice for the best ways to do this? Because most of these times, right, when you're improving a process or you're trying to personalize an experience, you're testing out theories, right? You're testing out if this, you mentioned, getting an email or getting maybe a text right after your card gets eaten, hopefully not in an ATM. Does that improve the overall satisfaction? Like how, in that example, like you mentioned A/B testing, like what did that look like from an A/B standpoint?
So yeah, I think I remember at that time we had to really research a lot, right? I think there's a lot being written and done in the marketing context, right? Where
Right.
you talk to Walmart, you talk to Target, all of those retail giants have been doing A/B testing for ages.
Right. And
You know,
that's mainly around like marketing content. So like the blue creative is better than the red creative, that kind of thing
or
from
whom
an
to send an
engagement.
email, what kind of email, for example, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I think in our context, that's when we were trying to really find analogs. It was very difficult to find. And a simple question we were not able to answer is, what should be my sample size on which I need to experiment, right? Because
Right.
we had to do this A/B testing on what kind of cohort or for how many days we have to run this experiment so that we can statistically prove, saying that
Hmm.
we are able to change the customer behavior of not calling the call center when their card is stuck to versus being happy once they received an SMS. And I think we had to really research a lot, and therefore this area is still a little bit underdeveloped, right? What should be the ideal sample size? What should be how long you need to run your experiment? What defines the statistical significance? Obviously, you have these p-value,
Right.
but then what is the really right level? So all of that research we had done, but I think we were able to really fast experiment, right? Because there was less risk, because you're just trying to send an SMS to people. You're not encroaching in their personal space. Um, you know, People have
Right.
allowed us to send SMS to them.
Right. They have
But I
to
think,
opt in to say like, yes, send me an SMS. But those who haven't opted in, like, there
yes,
are other communication channels, and I think what you were optimizing for in this specific use case was whether or not they actually call into the bank. And I imagine also you want to make sure that they don't leave the bank, right? Like I could imagine
yeah.
in a severe case, right? You might say like, okay, this is the last straw. I'm done with this bank. I'm so frustrated, right? So, but those are the things that you're sort of you were measuring when you're doing some of your testing.
And I think again, that's where there is no end to the measure, right? You can measure, just whether they're calling the call center or not, but then you can also measure have they increased the transaction, have they decreased the
Yeah.
transaction with us, right? Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say you got to be careful, right? Because you don't want to just optimize for do they call into the call center, right? Because that's a cost to the bank, right? And that's something that the time is money, and you want to limit those calls in. But really, what you're optimizing for in customer experience analytics is the customer like satisfied? Like, are they happy? Like, did that experience, despite it being, I mean, on the whole, it's going to be a negative one, right? It's hard to turn that into a positive, but it can if you sort of overwhelm them with like a very personalized and make them sort of feel like there was some reason why your card was eaten, and it was to protect you or what have you, and here's what we're doing about it, and
so I
here's
think
yeah.
so. That's an interesting point. We also actually did A/B testing on the content of the message itself, right? As you said,
Mm-hmm.
people simple things in English people can interpret very different, right? Depending
Right.
on how you perceive it. So I think so there's a lot of gamut to this experimentation, and there's no, it will never get over, right? I think you can make as
Yeah.
complex as possible. I think what we realize is first we have to do it very simple experiment. Once we prove the simple, then try to make it more complex. But that make sure that you highlight what things you have not what assumptions you have made in saying your experiment is successful or not successful. And I think it's
Right.
also come with a culture. I remember in that company, we had a culture of saying we have to do 1,000 experiments as a company. Yeah. And I
Right.
think it also comes from the top down. A culture of experimentation and really trying to change and delight the customers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're doing all these experiments for what purpose? You're doing it not just, like I was saying before, not just to like potentially cut costs or increase revenue, but actually to delight the customer. Like that's the
Yes.
focus is if you do that first, some of these other things hopefully will follow. One thing very specific, maybe in the weeds, but there's looking at the next, the customer's behavior after one of these experiments happens. But do you actually, were there times when you would just survey them, like, and just go direct and just say like, hey, what was your experience like? Or do you just look at those events after the fact, the customer events after the fact?
Yeah, I think it was again. It is both ways, right? So you do after the fact because then you have less sample size constraint because you have rich historical data, more big data, if you will. But then yeah, you have to still do focused interviews. So I think you cannot replace the qualitative aspect of this customer experience, right? Which is where you really get more close to the customer. And I think this big data approach helps you define, as you were saying, personas, right? So now you have these 10 personas, then you can have focused group interactions with each of these personas, and they really live the life of the customer, right? What he
Mm-hmm.
does a whole day. And then you realize that he's been doing these 10 transactions in these different areas, this persona and so on and so forth. And these are the needs of those customers. They want something which is touchless. Some customers still want cash transactions. Some
Mm-hmm.
customers like to use only laptop for transactions, not even iPhone. So I think those are the things which you really get to touch and feel when you walk with the customer, right? So
Right.
both go hand in hand to answer your question. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So, some combination of looking at the data, right? Looking at all the various events that a customer is creating as they interact with you as a bank in this specific scenario, and then also just reaching out to them directly and just asking them,
Yeah.
by way of survey. But that's been very helpful in them, and I think that many of our listeners out there should be thinking about how to create a better customer experience and what role data science has to play. And I think we touched on a bit of that. And also, before that, we touched on responsible AI, and then we touched a bit on the importance of sort of starting with a POV and how the bar has been raised over the years in terms of the expectations of what a POV looks like, which I think is, as I mentioned before, a good thing. But hey, I really appreciate you coming on the Data Science Leaders podcast, Nimit. If folks want to reach out to you and have additional questions, can they reach out to you via LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to see where can I help. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time, Nimit. It was a blast having you on, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Dave. Have a nice evening to you. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.